Welcome back to the LCC Leaders Forum. This is our final session of the day, a conversation between two ladies who need no introduction. Justine Picardie is a British novelist, fashion writer and biographer. She was the editor-in-chief of Harper's Bazaar UK and Town & Country UK and is now a contributing editor to both publications. Her 2010 biography of Coco Chanel was shortlisted for the Galaxy National Book Awards, just one of 5 books she's written. We are all very excited about her new upcoming book, Miss Dior. Jacqueline Euwe is Chief Luxury Officer of Hearst Luxury. Jackie oversees the UK's luxury portfolio and is responsible for the brand and commercial strategies across these titles to deliver growth and drive revenues. Jackie has over 20 years experience in the luxury sector and unrivaled expertise in luxury publishing. Take it away, ladies.
Thank you, Rosie, for that wonderful introduction. Yes, as Rosie said, I'm Jackie Euwe, Chief Luxury Officer at Hearst UK. I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting a Q&A with one of my favorite people in the industry, Justine Picardie, who is a trusted friend and a colleague of mine who I absolutely have huge respect and I adore. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Justine Picardie. Justine?
Hi, lovely to see everybody and lovely to see you, Jackie, my dear friend.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions, Justine, which I find fascinating. I find your whole life fascinating. I'm broadcasting from my living room in Battersea as we go into our lockdown number 2.
Yes.
And I know that you're in Norfolk.
Yes.
And, you know, we all enjoyed following you on your lockdown number 1. So we're all going to be, you know, pending your lockdown number 2. But I'd like to start really by
Instagram, yes.
Well, I'm going to ask you about your mum, actually, because I know your mother was a great influence in your life from a very young age. And how did this relationship shape your life?
That's such a good question. And amazingly, nobody's asked me that before. My mother was a very young mother. And she was very radical and rebellious. And Jackie, having worked with me, you probably know I have that streak of radicalism, which I inherited from my mother. She got married in a little black dress, a Chanel dress, which was rather a dramatic thing to do. I was born 8 months later, and she met and married my father when, you know, and just after 6 weeks of knowing him. And I think it was rather amazing to get married in a little black dress, a Chanel dress, you know, in 1961. And so to me, there's something, and she was very, very fashionable, but in that kind of 60s radical chic kind of way. But I think there was something about her and about that, you know, getting married in a little black Chanel dress, which made me realize that fashion could be subversive, and that, I mean, it was a great luxury, of course, to get married at the age of 21 in a little black dress. She didn't have lots of money to spend, but she spent a lot of money on this dress. And it's that strange, potent mixture of surprise, of chic, of radicalism, that is embodied in my mother and in her wedding dress.
You take after your mother then, Justine, do you?
Well, yes. I mean, I wore that Chanel little black dress when I was a teenager. I was a teenage punk with sort of spiky, you know, blue hair and spiky red hair, and I wore this Chanel little black dress, but, you know, with DMs or with 1950s stilettos, and, you know, and probably, you know, bright red nails, and I went to see the Clash and the Sex Pistols, and yeah, I mean, fashion can be very surprising, and it can continue to surprise us in ways that I love.
And I also love the dress that you got married to Philip in, which was a Dior dress, if I'm not mistaken.
No, it was another Chanel dress, actually, which was rather wonderful because, yes, Philip, who Jackie knows, is my beloved second husband. He's a good example of second chances. After my first marriage ended, I really didn't think that I would marry again. And I thought I was going to devote myself to, you know, my sons, my work, my writing, my friends. Anyway, needless to say, I did meet somebody else and get married and fall in love. And I got married like my mother in a Chanel dress, but it was a beautiful cream ivory dress, to the ground, but very streamlined, very grown up, the most elegant dress I've ever worn. And it was after I'd, you know, written the Chanel biography, and I'd become close to Karl Lagerfeld. I first met Karl in 1997, and when I was writing the book, it was during that time that I met Philip, and I remember sending Karl the first 6 chapters of the book. And, you know, he had a real subversive streak as well. He had a very sort of surprising, witty, radical streak, but he also loved books and he loved publishing. He had more books than anybody I've ever, you know, encountered in the world. He had a library of 500,000 books, and he loved reading. And I sent him the first 6 chapters of the book, and he loved them and was hugely encouraging and was a sort of, you know, a great mentor of mine. Anyway, when he discovered that I was marrying Philip, he said, well, you've got to get married in Chanel. And he did make me this beautiful Chanel cream ivory dress.
There was obviously a very important person in your life who was missing at your second wedding. And obviously there was a very sad and traumatic episode in your life when your beloved sister Ruth passed away. But what has been her legacy, and how has she continued to inspire you, Justine?
Well, as you say, Ruth died at the age of, I mean, in 1997, so it's a long time ago, and she was just 33 when she died of breast cancer, and she had 2 baby twins when she died. Ruth, like me, was a journalist. She was a natural writer. I was rereading the letters that she wrote to me when she was a teenager. Actually, she was a couple of years younger than me, and when I went to Cambridge to study English literature at university, Ruth was still living at home, but she often came to visit me in Cambridge. But she was a great letter writer, and I was rereading her letters, and they're so full of life. And, you know, even as a 16-year-old, you could tell she was going to be a writer. Anyway, she became a journalist as I did. And some of you who are old enough, who are listening, may remember the columns that Ruth wrote, Before I Say Goodbye, which I published when I was the editor of the Observer magazine. And she wrote about the experience of facing death when you're really too young to die. And after her death, I turned those columns into a book called Before I Say Goodbye. But I would say that what I learned from my experience of, you know, this wonderful relationship was the importance of being sisterly and of sisterhood. So when I talk of sisterhood and being sisterly, it's really profoundly embedded in me because of my relationship with Ruth. But I would still say that what I learned after her death was that love doesn't end when somebody that you love dies. I mean, that's the miracle of love. Death does not extinguish love. And, you know, I am the woman I am today. I was shaped by my sister's love, and I was shaped by my own love for my sister, and that continues. I also, when I'm writing a book or journalism, you know, Ruth is in my mind is still one of the people I'm writing for. This, you know, funny, clever, sisterly, you know, warm woman who is still my reader. And when I was editing Harper's Bazaar and working so closely with Jackie, you know, really the whole ethos of the magazine was based on that, and that we were reaching out, and this is continuing under my successor, Lydia Slater, who I feel like a sister to. She feels like my, you know, younger sister. We're still reaching out to those sisterly women.
Yeah, and I felt that throughout your editorship as well, that, you know, we were also called many times the dynamic duo. We were the perfect partnership, and
Yes,
the fact it was due to the respect that we had for each other and the love that we had for each other, and we still.
exactly. And that still continues. And, you know, when I'm loyal to somebody, and that includes, you know, Jackie, you know, Lydia, who's now the editor-in-chief of Bazaar and Town and Country, you know, Avril Mayer, the fashion director of Bazaar and Town and Country, and now Elle. And Avril was somebody that you know, I hired, I recruited, as I did Lydia, to be my deputy. You know, they feel still, as does Jackie, you know, they're my friends, but I do feel sisterly towards them, and my loyalty, you know, towards them will always be there. It will always be strong. And that's something that arose out of my relationship with my sister Ruth.
Yeah,
I've got your backs.
And you tend to learn a lot about yourself when you go through, you know, something as sad and, you know, and
resilience is such an important quality to learn. And,
yeah.
you know, like everybody goes through testing times. You know, we all know the meaning of loss and disappointment, and
More now than ever, really.
and challenge, loss, disappointments, you know, a sense of all the things that are part of what makes us human. Also, we learn resilience from, and that builds strength of character, and that's what makes us ultimately both strong but also kind. You know, I think kindness is incredibly important, and once you've gone through a very challenging experience yourself, and indeed, you know, we are all in this country and in the world going through this extraordinary challenge of the pandemic, it is teaching us courage, resilience, and also kindness. And those are very, very important qualities.
Yes, I totally agree. And actually, this brings me nicely to my next question, Justine, because obviously you're the best-selling author of Coco Chanel book. And most recently, you've just finished your book on Dior.
Yeah.
Now, both Coco Chanel and Christian Dior and his sister Catherine faced a great deal of adversity during their lives. And we're currently facing challenging times ourselves due to the pandemic. Are there any learnings that we can take from them to help us navigate our current challenges and situation we're in?
Yes, I think that both those characters, and indeed Catherine Dior, Christian Dior's sister, who he was exceptionally close to, really their past experiences can offer a great deal of guidance to the future. So to start with Coco Chanel, I mean, she was born in the 19th century and suffered terrible adversity. Her mother died, her father abandoned her, she was brought up in a convent orphanage. So she knew loss and abandonment from the get-go. And then she lived through the First World War. And then when you think what happened just after the First World War was the Great Flu pandemic, which killed even more people than the First World War had. And that Chanel started her business in 1910 and, you know, achieved a measure of success rapidly. She starts appearing in the editorial pages of Harper's Bazaar by about 1915. But she really hits her stride after the First World War and after the flu pandemic, in that she comes to signify the powerful, independent, courageous modern woman that emerges in really 1920 and in the 1920s. And she dresses that independent modern woman in a totally different way to anything that's been seen before. So you see the little black dress, which is introduced, where Chanel has turned the color of mourning, of death. And so many people had lost somebody, you know, 50 million people had died after the First World War and the flu pandemic. And she turns it into a symbol of courage and strength. So she introduces the little black dress. She cuts her hair. So, you know, before this, women did not have short cropped hair. So that's also crucial. She brings a kind of measure, I would say, of not exactly democratization, but if people can't afford a Chanel little black dress, they can afford a red Chanel lipstick. And you really see that. And she introduces Chanel No. 5 in 1921. So alongside, you know, the launch of these key beauty products, the little black dress, she's also introduced women wearing trousers. So also, you know, the kind of stripy top, so which is based on fishermen's jerseys, which, you know, and I'm wearing one, and although you can't see it, I'm wearing the kind of trousers that Chanel introduced. So she also brings a measure of feminism and independence for women. So out of enormous disruption, crisis, bereavement, and global, you know, despair, Chanel emerges in a very interesting way. And then similarly, Christian Dior, who was already working as a fashion designer in the late 1930s, he'd suffered terribly in his life. His initial ambition had been to be an art gallerist, and he'd opened 2 art galleries, very, very far-sighted. You know, he was showing Picasso, Dali in the late 1920s and other great modern painters. But then after the Wall Street crash in 1929 and the Great Depression in the early 30s, nobody wanted to buy modern art. And his art galleries both closed, both went bankrupt. His mother died. His father, who had been very wealthy, lost all his money in the wake of the Wall Street crash and was left penniless. And Dior found himself in the situation of having to support his father and his beloved younger sister, Catherine Dior. He did also have a younger brother who at this point was in a lunatic asylum, as they would then know, a mental establishment, because he'd had a breakdown and developed schizophrenia. So Dior had to earn a living, and he taught himself to do fashion illustrations, and he began as an illustrator, including actually for Harper's Bazaar. And he was working as a freelance fashion designer in the late 30s, and then war breaks out, and he's called up in 1939, along with, you know, everybody else who was French of a certain age. And he was on sort of what was called farm duty. He was in the engineers of the army and went to help out on a farm, of all things. And then France fell in June 1940 with the Nazi invasion, and he managed to make his way back to where his father and younger sister were living, in the south of France, which at that point was not yet occupied by the Germans. And they started growing vegetables. You know, they already were growing flowers, but they grew vegetables because they had no food and no money. Anyway, I'm exploring all of this in my book, but his sister Catherine joined the French resistance, was arrested and was deported to a concentration camp in 1944. Nobody knew where she was, if she was alive or dead. Christian didn't give up hope. He went to see a tarot card reader who said she's still alive, she will return. And indeed, after the end of the Second World War, at the end of May 1945, Catherine did return from the concentration camp, and Christian met her at the station and didn't even recognize her. And at this point, the whole of Europe was in ruins. You know, we think we're going through a tough time, but compared to the end of the Second World War, you know, cities were bombed. Every European economy was devastated. People were homeless, and millions had died. You know, something like 50 million people had died. So to rebuild as rapidly as happened after the war is extraordinarily inspiring, I think. So when we keep, you know, going back to the First and Second World War in for historical perspective, it's really important because it should teach us historical lessons, but also teach us hope. So what Dior did, not long after his sister returned, he decided he hadn't shown any ambition before to set up his own business, but his own couture house, but he did, and he received financial backing from a textile entrepreneur who'd never really done couture before. And he set up his own couture house, and he launched the new look, as it became known. Carmel Snow, the then editor of Harper's Bazaar, called it the new look. And it did look very new. This was after, you know, austerity, rationing, in that it looked very glamorous. He used a lot of material. He had tight waists and the bar jacket, but very, very full skirts and long skirts. You know, his dresses were using 80 yards of fabric at a time when rationing was still in force. So it looked revolutionary, but at the same time, in fact, it was very nostalgic for the way women in certain ways had looked before the First World War, in that it was very romantic, you know, floor length or, you know, almost to the ankle length skirts, corseted waists, tight jackets, and romance, magic, escapism. So Chanel and Dior are really polar opposites in what they do. Chanel brings in something that gives women a lot of freedom in the way that they can move and dress. Dior does something different in that he reintroduces corsets, which, by the way, enraged Coco Chanel and made her make her comeback in the early 50s after she'd retired. So she made a triumphant comeback in her 70s, which shows that, you know, it's never too late to make a triumphant comeback. And she became more famous than ever, partly because she was so annoyed by the new look. Yeah. But nevertheless, I think both these great, iconic, legendary figures of luxury show us how a crisis can be turned into something truly creative and transformative.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we did a lot of work during the pandemic. The editors were brilliant, especially Lydia, who did a big piece on adversity, you know, and in a time of crisis, in a time of crisis, and how we get over that, and it was brilliant. And you know.
Yes, and I read that piece, you know, and they really were wonderful. But sometimes people say to me, when are we going to get back to normal? And I think that what these, you know, historical events that I've been talking about have taught us, the great flu pandemic, the Wall Street crash, the Great Depression, 2 world wars, is that what people do, they don't go back to the way things looked before. They don't just continue as if it was before. You do need to do interesting things that also draw
draws creativity out of everybody, really.
Exactly, but it does draw on the past. So, you know, Chanel, it looks very modern, it is very modern, but she is drawing on the idea of gentleman's tailoring. And, you know, as it happens, it was English gentleman's tailoring, almost sort of Edwardian tweed jackets, a kind of sporting wardrobe of the kind that her then lover, the Duke of Westminster, would have worn. And she's using traditional English tweeds, you know, Scottish cashmere. So she is using tradition as well. And it's not that everything has to look totally different. You know, it is important to be aware of tradition, but also of what real luxury means. And that, you know, luxury can mean different things to different people, but it does mean a certain level of beauty, creativity, and desire and pleasure and joy.
Yeah. And you've obviously worked with many PRs over the years, and actually lots of them are your friends, personal friends.
Yes, some of them are my closest friends.
Some of them are your closest friends. And, you know, in a world where there's information overload, how can one cut through the noise and actually make a difference when communicating with editors?
Well, I think those personal relationships are really important. You know, I have close friends who are PRs, and we sort of started out at the same time, and, you know, have
And
you know,
hopefully people are watching this today. So
yes, some of them, you know, I've known since the 1990s. And so a personal relationship matters, and also mutual respect. I think that just sending out a kind of an email, just a sort of generic email, is not going to work for anybody. I also think that, you know, personal contact really matters. And obviously, you know, during lockdown, that's difficult, but you can still pick the phone up to somebody. And I think that just understanding one another, I mean, I can always see things from a brand's perspective because of having worked so closely with both Chanel and Dior. And before I joined Hearst, I mean, after I left Condé Nast, where I'd worked for Vogue, and I also, you know, have worked for the Telegraph and the Sunday Times, but there have been periods when I've been writing books but also doing consulting for brands. So I definitely always see things from a brand's point of view. And what works best is when you can come up with a joint project that works for everybody. But I think that that brands, when they're working really successfully, are working across a very wide range, diverse range of storytelling, basically. And the Dior exhibition at the V&A, which was such a success, and was actually something that I'd suggested, you know, many years before it happened. I was looking in the Dior archives and said, my God, this would make an amazing exhibition. And, you know, somebody from Dior and I had a meeting with the V&A, it must be 10 years ago, to start talking about the process. But exhibitions which will return, you know, people will really want to go back to museums. I mean, they already were going back to museums before the second lockdown. I think a very important element of storytelling. I think books are really important. It's interesting. Bloomsbury announced their results last week. The publishers, they've had their best set of financial results since 2008. And it's clear, you know, from other publishers are saying the same, people are reading books. And if you're spending all your time, you know, on social media or Zoom or all the things that we do all the time, there's a great pleasure in reading a book or reading a magazine. I do think it's hard to read long form on a device. And I think there is a great appetite for long form. I mean, we're seeing this with the rise of book sales. And I'm interested in the way that brands are also producing, you know, their own brilliant content. So I did a series of podcasts earlier this year for Dior, which was really interesting. I think that podcasts, you know, have been revolutionary, and people have really enjoyed the intimacy of what is essentially long form. So a podcast demands a certain commitment. I mean, it's not a 30-second soundbite. It's a commitment on both sides, really, to engage with one another. So to go back to a great, you know, writer that I first read as a 18-year-old, Inly Connect. Human beings have a desire to connect, and they connect through storytelling. I think, you know, we're hardwired for storytelling. I also think we are hardwired for a belief in magic. Now, magic means different things to different people, but to me, there is a real magic. I sometimes, you know, there's a magic in so many things, whether it's seeing a rainbow, or, you know, choosing a beautiful ring for somebody that you love, accepting a ring, you know, that the magic of talismans, jewelry is so magical.
It's so personal, isn't it?
Yes, and that dates back, you know, probably to as long as humans have been humans. They've decorated themselves with jewelry, and so I think that, it's tapping into that.
Yeah. And you always said about jewelry, it's the closest thing to your skin, and therefore
Exactly. It's so intimate. It's so intimate.
Yeah.
So
what
it's
do you,
intimacy that we need to rediscover
I think
after a pandemic, when we've all had to be, so physically separated from one another.
absolutely, that human touch is so important, and
Yeah.
it's never going to go away. So that leads me to ask you, really, what is the future for the luxury sector? What does the future hold for us?
Well, if any one of us knew that, we'd be billionaires. But okay, I'm going to take a wild guess. I'm hoping to. I do believe in intuition. I've always believed in intuition and instinct, and I've always followed it in my career. And Jackie, you know me very well, and you know that about me. So, okay, following instinct, I would say we will see the emergence of our equivalents for our, of this lifetime of a Chanel or a Dior. We don't know who that will be, but there will be somebody, and it may take a little bit of time. It may not happen. It may not happen. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but I think we will see that happening. I think that just as there was the post-war economic miracle that Dior kind of represented when you see his massive success, and the great success of the Marshall Plan, which helped rebuild Europe after the war with a very generous America. I mean, we're talking at the time of just after the American elections, where we don't know what's going to happen. It looks like it's going to take days to know what's going to happen. But so it may not be America that comes up with the Marshall Plan, but, after both the First World War and the Second World War, there was economic recovery. So you see the Roaring 20s, the Jazz Age, where people wanted to go out and drink cocktails, and there was this great flowering of jazz music, of writers like Scott Fitzgerald, of designers, like Coco Chanel. And then similarly in the post-war, what Dior represented, which was people embracing the idea of romance, but you also saw the economic miracle, in the car industry as well, and in household goods. So there will be something's going to, emerge like that. But I would hope that we will be kinder, that we will cherish the things that, we have been denied, which is intimacy, touch, the ability to, meet your friends and have a cup of tea with them and hug them. I think that's going to be really important. And I also think luxury has to be meaningful. You can't, if there's a sort of million units of trainers sitting in a warehouse somewhere that for some reason haven't sold in the pandemic and are, be really expensive and, be luxury, but not feel very luxurious. I don't think people are going to respond to that personally. I think that something has to feel special. The first thing that I did when I heard there was going to be a second lockdown was to get a manicure and pedicure, because, and I know a lot of, my friends went to the hairdressers, and the first thing I did when I was allowed to post the last lockdown was to go and get a haircut. And it's not just, that I wanted a haircut, and yesterday I wanted a manicure, pedicure, I wanted that human touch. Okay. So I don't believe everything's going to be about online in luxury. Obviously, online is very important, but I think, the joy of going and trying something on is really, really important. And of course, and I did online shopping during the lockdown, and some of it worked and some of it didn't. And, I bought some jeans from a place I often bet, buy jeans from, and these ones just didn't work. But of course I didn't return them because it was difficult and I didn't feel particularly happy about the purchase. I didn't blame the retailer, you know, but next time I buy a pair of jeans, it's going to be in a shop. Yeah. And similarly, if I'm going to make a big luxury purchase, it's going to be in a shop. I am a great fan of what, you know, Maria Grazia Chiuri is doing at Dior, and you look at Dior's profits, which, you know, the financial results are not a secret. LVMH is, you know, its financials look pretty good. It seems to be doing okay. And that would suggest that luxury is robust. I also think it's interesting that, you know, Chanel has its first female designer since Gabrielle Chanel herself.
And what does the future hold for you then, Justine?
Oh, wow.
This is your final question. I can let you go after this.
My book's coming out next year, September 2021. I'm hoping, as are my publishers, that, you know, we'll be back at being able to talk in person at events. So I hope I'm going to meet lots of people. I hope I'm going to be able to go on a book tour, as I have done with previous books. And I'm going to carry on writing for Harper's Bazaar and Town and Country, continue as a contributing editor, carry on writing for people that want me to write for them, and carry on working with people I love and admire. And that includes, you know, you, Jackie, I hope. So carry on and do a lot of gardening. That's the other thing that I must talk about, which is the luxury that we have discovered for many people this year has been gardening, outdoor space. And yeah, that still matters a great deal to me.
Thank you, Justine. You are truly an inspiration. It's been an absolute honor to be with you today and ask you some lovely questions, and thank you.
And I'm about to say a huge thank you to you both. I think we could have listened to you all day, so I'm so sorry to have popped up in the middle of that and broken up the conversation, but we are out of time, and that is it for the Luxury Communications Council Leaders Forum 2020. A very big thank you, as I say, to Jackie and Justine, but also to all of our speakers today. I'll see some of you for a couple of minutes at the Maison de LC, at the virtual networking session, which is actually reserved for our LCC members and official partners, the link for which is in your calendars, your individual calendars. And the rest of you, I look forward to seeing you, well, hopefully in person again very soon. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.